So biofuels really first came on the scene when the first automobile was produced. Way back when the Model T came out, the idea was to run it on an alcohol-based fuel, which later in the 20th century became known as ethanol, corn-based fuel. So we started using ethanol in the 80s. There were policies called the Gasohol Act trying to encourage the blending of corn-based ethanol into the gasoline supply to enhance its octane, to extend the fuel supply. But I think you really started seeing growth of biofuels starting in the early 1990s with the Clean Air Act amendments and the establishment of the reformulated gasoline program, which created an opportunity for ethanol to be an additive product in 1/3 of the regulated gasoline supply in the country. It didn't take off the way they expected to because refiners were able to use a different product to satisfy the requirements of the reformulated gasoline program. But then you fast forward into the 2000s as we transition away from that additive product, methyl tertiary butyl ether, and transition to the renewable fuel standard, which created an opportunity for the biofuels industry to really gain market share. 2005, the Congress set a standard looking to increase the use of qualified renewable fuels such as ethanol or biodiesel to 7 billion gallons by the year 2012. Fast forward 2 more years to the Energy Independence and Security Act, and that renewable fuel standard, known as the RFS-2, was expanded to a goal of 36 billion gallons by the year 2022. And so you start seeing this rapid increase in biofuel utilization towards the end of the first decade of the 21st century. But it is a product that's been around for a century or more, biodiesel or more recently than that, but they're really starting to come to their own. And then when you think about other programs like the low carbon fuel standard in California, that really created market opportunities and incentive programs to transition some of the biofuel production to renewable diesel and some testing of renewable gasoline to really open up the opportunities to bring these renewable fuels to market in greater quantities.
Yeah, I would add, more recently to John's point, the goal from a policy standpoint is to always advance the biofuels. So even under the renewable fuels standard and under CARB's LCFS program, the idea is to constantly improve. So whether that's making more advanced biofuels or cellulosic biofuels, the goal there is to continually improve. Now, we haven't come close to what those goals were. And quite frankly, that's one of the major failures of the renewable fuel standard, is that we were not able to achieve, some of those buckets of biofuels such as cellulosic. But I think the goal is still there, especially under CARB's LCFS program, where everybody is really trying to get their carbon intensity as low as possible, because the lower your carbon intensity, the more credits you can generate on that fuel. But that's more of a recent, over the past 10-year development.
But that's an important evolution. When the renewable fuel standard in 2005 was first enacted, the idea was get out of using MTBE, which created environmental problems and legal liability for the fuels industry. In 2007, when we expanded to 36 billion gallons, it was really wrapped around the concept of carbon reduction, addressing climate change and mitigation strategies, supporting farmers and agricultural commodities. But you had George W. Bush in the White House. You had an oil industry where oil prices were exceeding $100 a barrel going into that year. You had the oncoming recession next, but the country kind of wrapped itself up in this idea of energy security and how do we eliminate and reduce the U.S. reliance on foreign sources of oil, which was considered to be an economic and energy strategic risk. So the renewable fuel standard has so many different layers to it. To Jeff's point, it is designed to reduce carbon, and you get different credits based upon your carbon reduction on a life cycle basis for the product. But it was also, how do we become energy independent? How do we reduce our reliance on OPEC? How do we protect consumers from international influence of price volatility and supply instability? So combination, since 2007, 2008, the focus has transitioned much more to a reduced carbon threshold approach. And the combination of the low carbon fuel standard and the renewable fuel standard combined is really providing greater opportunity for the biofuels industry to really step up and take a larger role in the market.